No! Stop! A man's voice cried out in pain as he tried crawling himself forward from something that seemed so frightening. The thing after this man appeared to have a giant foot and was determined to get to him even as he tried to crawl away from it. The man in anguish continued crying out, saying not when he had gone that far as he continued pleading for mercy from the frightening figure following him. But determined, the big monstrous figure which was swaying an axe towards the man who was already in pain and injured, didn't listen to him and seemed ready to finish what it was up to. The man's cries would fill the air as he shouted, "You!" The monster was holding two beheaded heads in its hand and quickly moving towards the wailing man who was screaming for mercy that was not forthcoming. With no hesitation, the monster struck the man who screamed in more pain, and he shouted again that he didn't want to go back as he felt every bit of pain running through his body, and in a weak voice he asked why that was happening as he faded away into obscurity. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and found himself in bed in his room. He looked at his watch and it was 3:15 p.m. His room appeared messy with papers lying on his table unarranged. It was then that he realized he was dreaming and that he had overslept. He had to get ready for work to avoid being late. Our main protagonist is called Kojo Shinichiro, and he is a 40-year-old man who works in a construction site and appears to live alone. Kojo looked at his phone and he saw that the text messages he had sent to you were not replied to. From the texts, we can see it's from the previous day and there was no response. This left him devastated as he got out of bed to prepare himself for work. In the process, he felt an acute pain in his hip and knew he was getting pretty old. Swiftly, he prepared himself for work and then left for work. He reached his workplace in time and quickly jumped to his post. On this day, Kojo was tasked with controlling traffic so as not to interfere with the work in progress. Suddenly, he had some commotion right behind him, and in curiosity, he turned to see what was happening. He saw a man fall between bicycles and people around him taking pictures and videos of him, others asking themselves what was going on and seeing the whole situation not looking good. The people recording the poor guy and laughing sarcastically said that they felt sorry for the poor bicycles and that the man was drunk. The man was also bleeding while lying down there. Kojo quickly started moving towards that scene, shouting to know if the man was okay. Kojo appeared worried for him. He got to him and helped him up to his feet while telling him that he was seriously injured and that he should follow him to his first aid kit so that he could help him. The man mockingly asked who that old man was and proceeded to land a heavy blow on Kojo's nose as he shouted that Kojo should not touch him with his filthy hands. This sent Kojo flying to the ground as people around the scene shouted that all that was brutal, that it was not good and that the police were going to be called. But the man seemed not to care. At this time Kojo was the one on the ground laying helplessly, all because he was kind enough to offer a helping hand which turned to bite him in the face. Kojo heard his supervisor call him, asking him not to leave his post or else he could fire him. Quickly, Kojo stood up saying sorry as he resumed his post. He rearranged the bicycles that had fallen and in the process, he thought to himself that he was too kind. During a break, Kojo was sitting next to his colleague who told him that he should have ignored that commotion, but Kojo just laughed it off, saying he could not help himself but try and help. His colleague continued telling him that if he kept up trying to help people, it would get worse, and Kojo told him that he was already aware of that. At this point, we realized that his colleague's name is Watanabe. Kojo tells him that his wife no longer loves him because of his kind nature and his habit of always wanting to help people. Watanabe just wondered to himself what kind of a person Kojo was. Then, Kojo heard a notification alert from his phone and he quickly checked what it was. It was text messages from you replying to his previous texts, telling him to stop sending the same messages over and over again, as if something interesting would happen every day. Then in the text, you asked Kojo, hoping he had not forgotten about the following day's appointment with her at Shinjuku, also reminding him not to oversleep. He looked at all these texts and his eyes became watery. He appeared pleased and relieved as he called out you. Watanabe asked if it was a notification from Kojo's daughter that he had mentioned to him before, and he said it was. He proceeded to tell him that he would be seeing her the next day for the first time in a while. Sadly, Watanabe told him that that was wonderful and he was so envious of him. This led Kojo to ask him what the matter was. He told him that he and his wife were divorced, but the wife wouldn't let him see his daughter. Kojo felt sorry for him as Watanabe appeared so disturbed and hurt by the fact he wouldn't see his daughter again. Then they heard their supervisor's voice, calling them part-timers mockingly, telling them that break was over and they should resume their post. As they were resuming work, out of sympathy for his colleague, Kojo told Watanabe that if there was anything he could do to help him, he just needed to say the word. Thoughtfully, Watanabe told him that after work he would tell him. After work, the two went to a restaurant and Watanabe removed a paper that looked like it was a loan application form. He told Kojo that there was a condition that if he paid his wife 3 million yen compensation, he would be allowed to see his daughter, but he did not have that money, so he had to take a loan. He was pleased knowing Kojo would lend him his name so that he could help him secure the loan. He seemed so disturbed by the situation and so desperate for the money. Watanabe knew Kojo was a kind person and wanted to take advantage of it. Kojo thought to himself that he knew putting his name on the loan application was not good for him should Watanabe fail to pay back the loan. But since Kojo is a very kind person, he could not say no and not help his colleague. So Kojo agreed, but before he could write his name on the loan paper, a young girl appeared from nowhere and poured water on the paper to the shock of the two colleagues. Puzzled still, Watanabe asked why she did that and he appeared so infuriated and angry but chose to play his emotions down. The girl, who was Kojo's daughter, called him out and Kojo was so delighted to see his daughter who was 17. She told his father that they were supposed to meet, but he failed to show up and she had to use a GPS app Kojo installed when he got lost to find him. She had a bad feeling after Kojo told her that he was going to do something before their meeting and decided to follow him. You told Kojo that he had to stop being kind and always wanting to help people. Commandingly, she told Kojo that they had to leave despite Watanabe's efforts of trying to calm the situation down by requesting you to hear him out. He tried pleading his case that he would pay the money back and that he just needed her dad's name, but Yu was having none of that as she was convinced that Watanabe was just taking advantage of her dad's kindness. She questioned the morality of Watanabe and knew he was just trying to get her dad involved in his devious plans, which she told him not to. She grabbed Kojo's hand and they stormed out of the eatery despite her father's effort to stop her. Watanabe was left alone, dejected and vividly angry. Kojo tried telling his daughter that she did not have to be that harsh on Watanabe as he just wanted to see his daughter very badly. Clearly, Kojo could not see he was being manipulated into trouble, as all he could see was that he was trying to help. This infuriated Yu, who was starting to get tired of his dad's kindness. She started walking fast away from her dad in anger. She shouted at him, telling him that their own family was divorced and separated, and yet all he was more concerned about was other people's homes. She further told him that if he ended up again in debt, then her mother would stop her from seeing him and asked him if he was okay with that. In shock, Kojo was speechless for a second and looked so confused by the whole conversation. Yu started to walk with tears starting to form in her eyes, as she said that she was done with him if he insisted on helping other people. Kojo shouted for her to wait for him as he ran after her, and he held her hand in the process. He apologized severally and asked her not to give up on him. Yu told him that if he was going to say that, he had to be better. Emotions were running high and Yu started crying, asking her dad why she had to protect him, and Kojo felt sorry and devastated. The two hugged and had a moment of father and daughter. In the process, Kojo felt that he had let down his daughter and he promised that he won't do anything like that again. He promised that he was going to be a good father, and Yu felt her father's affection and love. She told him that it was his turn to protect her because he was her dad and Kojo promised her. Delighted, Yu ran a few steps ahead of his father and told him that she was hungry after all the crying and that they should go eat. She seemed so happy and Kojo agreed to it as he was also happy to see his daughter in a better mood. Kojo asked her what she wanted to eat, and in the process, he thought to himself that he must change for his daughter's sake. Yu, who was a few steps ahead of him and full of happiness, did not notice a man right in front of her. As she was looking back telling her dad what she would like to eat, the man in front of her grabbed her in an instant fast enough for her not to get away, and commandingly, while holding a knife to her throat, told her not to move. The man was Watanabe. This shocked Kojo, who was a few steps behind all this. Kojo, surprised by his colleague's action, furiously asked what he was doing. Watanabe told him to shut up and that he was being blamed by everybody for everything. To him, all the fuss and the exaggerated domestic abuse were wrongly blamed on him, and he appeared furious. It was clear Watanabe was broken and that he desperately wanted Kojo to help him secure that loan. He cursed severally as Kojo was filled with terror as his daughter was being held at knife point. He pleaded with Watanabe to stop all that madness, but he was determined to get what he wanted. He told Kojo that it was him who told him that he would do anything to help, and he made him have high hopes and insisted that Kojo had to keep his promise. Kojo wondered how it was his fault for simply wanting to help but could not do it. Watanabe removed the loan form from his pocket and threw it in Kojo's direction, demanding him to sign it. Yu was trying to get out of Watanabe's strong grip, but he was too strong for her. She yelled at her dad, asking him not to listen to Watanabe and instead he should call the police. She called out Watanabe's behavior, and this in turn only got things worse. Watanabe became infuriated even more and he raised his knife in anger. Kojo knew he was almost going to draw that knife into his daughter's chest, and there was no way he was going to let that happen. Kojo ran to his daughter's rescue, shouting her name in the process. In his mind he knew he had to protect her as he had promised. This led to Watanabe pointing the knife in the direction of Kojo, and he proceeded to stab Kojo right in the neck and cut off his throat in cold blood. All this was happening so fast, and in a fraction of a second, Kojo was stubbed and lying on the ground bleeding in a pool of his own blood. This led to Watanabe releasing his grip on Yu, and she ran towards her father in agony and tears. Kojo was slowly getting lost in the darkness as he could not move his body, and it was clear that death was calling. All Kojo could see was his daughter crying and in vain trying to help her father by calling an ambulance as there was so much blood. Watanabe, on the other hand, was still shocked, not knowing what to do. He was left standing there perturbed and saying to himself that he was not at fault. Kojo was starting to drift into obscurity, and the last picture he could see was Watanabe rushing to his daughter with the same knife, ordering her to shut up. Kojo tried to tell her daughter to run away with all his might, but darkness overpowered him and he could not do anything to help his daughter. Kojo opened his eyes and found himself in a completely new place. He was lying in a bush and he wondered where he was. He sat upright and looked around, but he could not tell where he was, as all he could see was a flower garden around him. He noticed other people also appeared to be confused and did not know where they were. It was like they were in a completely new place. People kept asking themselves a lot of questions and they seemed not to get any answers. Kojo wondered how he got there and what he was doing there. Everyone was confused, finding themselves in that strange place. There was so much confusion and commotion. Then suddenly, a lady appeared in front of them in a flashing light, and she authoritatively asked them to be quiet. People wondered who she was. The lady was in a long black dress and one of her eyes was covered with a black cloth. The lady introduced herself as Tomoria and told them that she was a guide for that place. Still, people were confused and murmured about whether she was cosplaying or something. Others chose to acknowledge her beauty. Then one of the people asked her what that place was. The lady beside him also told her that she was on a date with her boyfriend and asked if she was the one who brought her there. She was visibly agitated. Tomoria told them that is the place where all living beings will come in the end, inevitably. She reminded them that they had forgotten something due to them and that she was going to return their memory. She told them to brace themselves as she snapped her fingers. All of a sudden, a strange flash of memory flooded their minds and they held their heads in agony as they recalled the last few moments before their deaths. It was a horrible experience as they had to relive the pain that they went through when they died. They shouted in pain as they recalled their memory. After which they could not believe that they died and were no longer living their normal lives. Kojo too could not believe that he died. He was shocked and disturbed too, like the others. He remembered that he left his daughter almost getting stabbed by Watanabe. Tomoria consoled them for their deaths and told them that they were on the boundary between the world of the living and that of the netherworld, which in Japan they call the Sanzu River. She showed them several boats and told them to proceed over to the boats and that a peaceful death was awaiting them. They were in disbelief and shocked to hear what she was saying. It was hard for them to believe. The people wanted to live again and some yelled that they wanted her to stop screwing around and they won't just accept it. Tomoria told them that she was only there to guide them after death. Kojo went on his knees and begged Tomoria, bitterly pleading with her to send him back. He told her that his daughter was about to be murdered. Tomoria asked him what he was doing, but Kojo continued stating it was his case, saying he could not let his daughter die because of him as tears started pouring out his eyes. Everyone then started saying their case, and this led to Tomoria realizing that those people were unable to accept their deaths. She told them that there was one way to return to the world of the living. The people pleaded with her to tell them. Though she did not recommend it, she decided to tell them since it was clear that was all they wanted. Tomoria showed them a mountain that on top had a ring-like structure with light shining in a straight line. She told them to go ahead to the mountain and that there was a door at the top of the mountain and they could be revived if they entered it. They looked at the mountain and saw it was very tall and wondered how many days it would take to reach the peak. Others wondered what if their bodies got cremated before they reached the peak. Some argued that it's tough but doable. Someone asked if any of them had mountain climbing experience and one military guy said he had. The military guy told them he was not an expert but he had some knowledge. This made the people's psyche up, believing that they could pull it off together as a team. But before they even started planning on how to get to the peak, Tomoria told them that she had one more thing to tell them and that it would burst their bubbles of hope. She told them that only the first person to reach the peak could enter the door. The crowd was shocked and left in utter disbelief. Others just lost their hopes upon hearing this and fell in defeat and disappointment. They realized that not all of them could get revived and they were furious. Women felt that men had an advantage over them and that it was unfair, but Tomoria told them that the rule was ordained by God and it could not be changed. She told them that if a person is revived, the door will be shut for the next 100 years. She told them that if they were heading there they should be on their way. After hearing this, the military guy started walking towards the mountain saying he had a family, and people then realized that they were on their own, and that it was every man for himself. They started running towards the mountain, not wanting to be left behind. Kojo also decided that he was going to try his chance and followed them. Tomoria tried telling them to wait but they would not listen to her. She told Kojo that the boats of Shanzu would be departing and that they would not return. She asked him if he wanted a normal death, but they said they wanted to live. Kojo thought for a while, then remembered his daughter and decided he would try his chances with the mountain. He remembered he had promised to protect her and he had to. So everyone left for the mountain. Tomoria looked at them as they hurried for the mountain. Kojo walked huskily towards the mountain and he realized that his physical ability was not different even after dying. His body was that of a 40-year-old man and he struggled with his physicality. He leaned on one tree as he gulped for air. He looked at himself and felt sorry for himself. He asked himself how far he had gone, but he could not tell the direction as there was a lot of fog. He was worried that the rest of the people were already ahead. He then heard some sound coming from a bush a few meters from him. It sounded like a scream and wondered what had happened. He then heard a distorted voice calling for help and he noticed the direction the voice was calling from. A part of him wanted to go and help, but he remembered that only one person can be revived and this made him to be in a dilemma with himself. He said to himself that he could not afford to help others, but then he continued hearing the voice shouting in agony for help. Being the kind-hearted person, who always wanted to help others, he could not help himself but feel sorry for the person calling for help. His emotions got the better of him and he decided to go and help the person. He called out to know where the person was as he went in the direction of the scream, then he noticed something from a distance. He saw someone crouched down and thought the person was hurt. He rushed closer to the person and he could not believe what he saw. The man was the military guy and he looked as though he had been devoured by wild animals, tearing him into pieces, and his intestines were out with his face distorted and unrecognizable. Kojo was so shocked and puzzled by what he saw as he tried to ask if he was okay. Words could hardly come out of his mouth. The image in front of him was so horrific. Suddenly, the guy tried to stand up and Kojo could not believe it as he was a corpse moving. He jumped away from him in terror and fell hard on the ground in the process. He asked himself what that was and why it was covered in blood. He did not understand anything at this point. Then suddenly, some monster creatures appeared with devilish smiles while holding sharp stones ready to tear him apart. The monsters got close to him and he could not move as he wondered what was going on. In a split second, Kojo was hit with the stone and it tore his face, destroying him and leaving a massive amount of pain. He quickly got up and in an attempt to run away another stone was thrown at him, hitting his head at the back, and he fell to the ground again. He tried asking them to wait so that they could talk and know why he was being attacked, but they would not listen to him. They terrifyingly came close, ready to finish him off. They used the sharp stone to hit him on the head. Even though he tried protecting himself using his hands, they were not enough. He screamed in agony, but they continued inflicting more and more damage and pain. They started tearing him apart, removing his every piece. He groaned in pain, but they did not spare him. He was starting to lose consciousness at this point. Then the monsters stopped and looked at him, suffering in pain and full of blood. He asked himself what those things were, and they just looked at him so scaringly, and he called them monsters. He then remembered his daughter and knew that if the monsters continued tearing him apart he would die. Suddenly adrenaline rushed through his body, and using every bit of energy he was left with, he kicked one of the monsters away, sending it flying to the others as he screamed out. He knew that was his last chance to save his daughter and started crawling in an attempt to run away. He was determined to get away, as he would not let it end that way. But he could not move fast enough, as the now angry monsters were after him, and they speared him through his throat while laughing as his energy ran out. He tried moving, but could not, no matter how hard he tried. The monsters surrounded him, looking at him, knowing they were about to have a nice feast. They devoured him like hungry hyenas and started eating him as he lay there totally helpless. The monsters removed his intestines and had a feast. Even though he wanted to live, this was beyond his capability. He shouted how much it hurt and how he was going to die there. His spirit was still determined to fight because he promised to protect his daughter, but his body was quickly fading away as he was being reduced to nothing. He screamed his lungs out, then suddenly, he found himself waking up again. Confused, he remembered being killed by those monsters. He sat upright and looked at his body as he was shocked that he was unarmed and naked. He woke up in the flower garden again, just as he did the last time he died. He asked himself again what that place was again. He realized it was the same place that he had arrived, and even wondered if he was dreaming. He said to himself that it couldn't be a dream, that he had just returned after dying the second time. He looked confused and so deranged at this point as he looked at the mountain again in disbelief. The place was freaking him out at this point. Tamoria was still there, watching all these happening and wondering, as she called them foolish sinners who were unable to ascend to heaven and could not even fall to the ground. Tamoria shouted that the challenge may begin, and she raised both her hands. People would get killed and then brought back to life at the flower garden again and again. Tamoria told them the task was that of purifying their souls, and that they could challenge it as many times as they liked until their spirits broke. Kindly subscribe to this channel for episode 2 and more amazing manga. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.